Chapter 127. Winning felt good. No surprise there. But the jubilant, giddy atmosphere among the members of the team kept ratcheting higher and higher, and everyone was behaving like they'd accomplished something much grander than winning a race against their classmates. They grabbed a spot together on the bleachers while the other two teams prepped for their own runs, and Alden basked in the victory right along with the rest of them. "We need to figure out how to make the pipe into an even stronger cannon," Jerry said. "Did you see my ice ball take out Fibry? His arm didn't work for the rest of the race." Everly nodded eagerly. "Is there something we could do to make pressure build up inside it, so it was more explosive? I should try out for the school team in January," Reinhard was saying. "Ranged Meisters are so good at this game, and it would give me lots of practice time in the gym." "You know the rules are different for different courses," said Hoyu. "So they don't always favor Meisters so heavily. Lexi, you've got to be relieved you finally got the chance to use Weather on a person, right?" Reinhard asked, clapping Lexi on the back so hard that Lexi almost dropped his water bottle. "The way you put that sounds dark," said Astrid. "Meisters need to train our weapons on the rest of you. That's just how it is." "I was pleased with Rither's performance," Lexi said. "He was really pleased," said Hoyu. "You can tell by his smirk." "There's a smirk?" Astrid, sitting on the other side of Alden, leaned around to examine Lexi's face. "You have to look close," said Hoyu. "Stop staring at me that hard," Lexi protested. "It's just a face." "Do you not smile much because it would make you look like Khan?" Astrid asked. "Of course not. I'm just not a smiley person. And technically Khan looks like me. I was born first." "Thank you for carrying my dirt," Maricel said to Lucille. "And you, Alden?" "And Lexi." Alden nodded at her. "Are we going to do it that way again?" "Oh, we don't have to," Maricel said. "Didn't we agree we'd try it for one run and then on the next we'd try something different so that everybody—" "I don't think any of us minded your efforts this time. And Alden did great getting people over the wall fast," said Hoyu. "So we don't have to have you for that necessarily. As long as he's not on the verge of wearing out his skill, I'm fine for another run as long as it doesn't turn into a big drawn-out mess like we had on our Wednesday attempts." Alden had planned to use his handicap before the next race. He usually ate the preserved breath mint in the middle of class so that he could double-run the skill and burn himself out just about on schedule every time. "I don't have to do it that way, though. It might be nice to have a little extra power at the right moment. And I can still feel it out when I'm close to where the limit should be." When he was close to what he deemed half-exhausted, he would quit. If he pushed it a smidge. A bow-like voice in his head told him that every time he did something like this he was risking people asking questions. I know. Suspicions stack up over time, so you have to be careful from the beginning. I'll only do it the smallest bit. Only if it really counts." He wanted to win again, not just to keep this good feeling going but also because their final run would be versus Team Van de Marcia. It wasn't like he had a rivalry with Winston Feather, but the speedster had been putting so much effort into being a shit since school started that Alden was sure letting him win would be inviting even worse behavior. Or maybe I'm slightly more spiteful than I should be. "Jeffy, you make the water obstacle so fast for us," Reinhard said suddenly. "We get through it way more quickly than any other team." "That's right," Jerry agreed. "Without you, our runs would take so much longer." Their voices had both turned encouraging to the point of being sugary. They are definitely going to try to get him to agree to stay in the tank for the whole next race. It would be the ideal situation for the team. And Jerry and Reinhard were their most vocally competitive members. Alden suspected that Everly and Lexi were just as interested in winning, but they tended to be quieter about it. "You do make things so much easier for us, dude," he said to the Aqua Brute. Jeffy was toweling off his hair aggressively, like he thought he could bring the waterlogged mohawk back to life. "I'm looking forward to seeing your lab moves on our next run, though." The wattage on Jeffy's smile made up for the glare Reinhard shot Alden. "We promised him," Alden silently mouthed at the archer. Jerry slumped in her seat. I'm gonna use my spell impression so hard for you guys," Jeffy announced. "I'm gonna attack everyone on the other team with it." "I don't think you can use a spell impression hard," said Everly. She sighed. "But we'll look forward to seeing how it goes. I can use it hard. It's like this feeling in your head. Like determination and wanting it real bad." A crease appeared between Everly's brows. "That's the spirit," said Astrid. "And maybe, after you've used it once, you can use your land moves to get back to the tank fast. Like, speedster fast. That would be cool." "Yes," said Reinhard. "After we let you attack the enemy, let's see how fast you can run back to the tank." Jeffy tilted his head and looked at Reinhard. "Are you scared of swimming by yourself?" Reinhard fumbled the jar of protective coating he'd been applying to his arrow tips and almost dropped it. "What? I mean, if you are, I'll stay in the water for you. You could have just told me you were a bad swimmer." "You." Reinhard's face was twitching from offended to exasperated. "He's not a bad swimmer," Alden said, before anyone could decide to stuff Jeffy back into his goldfish bowl with that little excuse. "None of us are bad swimmers. We do work faster as a team when you're helping us with a water obstacle, but we all agreed that we could try things out on the course, so don't worry about us." Alden, come down here for a minute." They all quieted at the sound of Leslie magnified voice. Alden stood. "Tell me if she says anything about me," Jeffy called after him. From behind him, Alden heard Hoyu, voice amused, saying, "Do you think she'd call Alden down there to talk about you?" Alden hopped down onto the gym floor and approached the head of the hero program. Principal Sleyca was standing with Instructor Klein, murmuring and pointing toward Tyette's back as she headed out toward the track with her team. "I'm sure Tyette's a big part of the reason their team has to fight back-to-back today. Unlike the first day, when winners had fought double matches, the run order for this afternoon had been pre-decided. The next race would be Finley Tyette Jupiter versus Vandy Marcia, then Finley Tyette Jupiter versus Fabrice Reich. Finally, Alden's team would go up against Vandy Marcia for the last run. "Sorry to pull you away from your team right after such an interesting win," said Principal Sleyca as Alden reached them. "You were moving well out there." "Thank you. Instructor Klein says you're learning a movement word chain?" Alden nodded. "My roommate's been tutoring me." "Which word chain is it?" Klein asked. "Well, I guess I should use the official name. My body becomes my assistant greater than, he said. Klein blinked at him. The principal lifted an eyebrow. "It increases my awareness of my own body and my control of it. By a lot. The system mentioned that it also increases situational awareness the first time Luke passed it to me, but I don't know that I've noticed that much. I'm still getting the hang of it." Luke says there's a learning curve. "When you say by a lot?" the principal asked. "The other day I unblushed with it. Like I was blushing, then I stopped. That was cool. I haven't been able to repeat something like that just yet, but the chain's making moving easier in general. Balance seems to be a big thing. I'm really aware when it's off, and it's very easy to correct." Luke says Keikoval recalls the chain gracefulness, so that makes sense. He thought of mentioning how Luke used it to gain control of his own facial expressions for acting. But since he hadn't tried that out himself yet, he left it off. "That sounds like a very useful word chain," Klein said. "Luke's a good tutor. He had to get permission to teach it to me, though." "Well, it's obviously working for you," said Principal Sleyca. She gave him a wry look. "So well that you've been anonymously reported for drug use." For a few seconds, Alden just stared at her. "Me?" he said finally. "What kind of drugs?" "Non-specified performance-enhancing ones. I'm not on drugs." It was such a stupid accusation that he was on the verge of laughing, which he belatedly realized was probably not the appropriate response. "I'm not on drugs," he said again. Calmly and maturely. "We know," said the principal. "I was just informing you in case you wanted to get a drug test and nip the matter in the bud right away. Or you can wait. Every member of your class is scheduled for random testing before the end of the quarter. We can just randomly test you now instead. If you want." I guess they're thinking that if someone throws it in my face, it might be better for me to be able to prove I'm not high on alien stimulants right away? Not the worst idea. And if it was the same test they'd all taken before, it was only a few minutes and no big deal. Okay. I don't mind. Head toward the labs room, then, said Principal Sleyca. One of the instructors will join you in a moment. Before he left the gym, Alden accessed his roommate chat. Alden, hey, I'm going to be drug tested. He looked up to see Hoyu and Lexi's startled expressions from the bleachers. Hoyu, you're happy about that? Alden, I'm so amazing someone in our class thinks I'm a criminal. Hoyu rolled his eyes dramatically. Lexi was scanning the class. Lexi, I bet it was Heel Feather. He has already gone out to the track, but I bet it was him. Yeah, he's the most likely suspect. Loot, is this because of the word chain? Alden, probably. The teachers seem to think so. I've become a source of envy with a single chain. It made him want to learn dozens more and apply them all at once to see if Winston's head exploded. I need to figure out how many hours I put into learning this one altogether. I feel like it was a really good return on my investment. He added it all up while he left the gym and headed toward the room where they'd done his last drug test. There were all the lunchtime tutoring sessions. I could count the in-class tutoring as half since we were only partially focused on me, the time we spent in the privacy booth, all the practice during breaks and in the evenings. More than 40 hours probably. Studying the word chain had taken over his life when he wasn't in school or practicing spellcasting instead. But he had it now. If he made sure to cast it at least once a week, he shouldn't forget all the little gestures that went into it, and if it always landed for him. It's more than worth it. I wonder what Loot really ought to be charging me for the tutoring. Even if we ignore the fact that he had to vouch for me with the Palace of Unbreaking to teach this one, there aren't a lot of amazing word chain tutors available for the uncommon chains. What do S-rank about charge to teach you things only they can teach you? By the time Foxbolt arrived to test him, Alden had looked up the hourly price for S-rank personal trainers at North of North. They were the kind of people who worked with you in the heavy hitters gym when you yourself were a beginner heavy hitter who needed someone to give you one-on-one advice about proper technique for headbutting pickup trucks into submission. He figured it was the best equivalent he could come up with. Loot was only a teenager, but he was a chainer. They were a really rare commodity. Let's get this all squared away, Foxbolt said, working down the hall toward Alden with a spring in her step. Excellent work mastering your new chain so quickly. She winked. She winked a lot at everyone. It made her eyeliner do the color switch from blue to orange and back. According to Reinhard, who kept track of all the faculty members' hero careers, it had been a cute camera habit for the instructor when she was a full-time superhero. Now that she was taking a break to spend more time with her family here on Unzidora, she still hadn't stopped doing it. Not scared of needles, are you? She asked, letting Alden into the room and opening a cabinet to grab supplies. I am not. He watched the bones of a holographic skeleton in the corner slowly change shape, presumably to mimic the effects of a morph's talents. Great. Have to ask. Foxbolt said. We've got a second-year student who'll take a sword to the face in gym and keep going without a flinch. So I didn't ask her before I gave her a little finger poke, and she hit the floor like I'd turned her legs into custard. Alden held out his hand and let the instructor jab him with a needle. She wiped the drop of blood onto a test strip, he spit into a vial of potion, then stepped into the body scanner. Going to go ahead and check you for magical tools as well, she said. Alden's heart beat faster. He was hyper-aware of it thanks to the word chain. Calm down, he told himself. Control your expression. Sounds good. He'd already been through this before. The scanner didn't pick up on the Oriad last time. It wouldn't this time either. It's closer to being a part of me than it is to being the kind of magic tool the school checks for. Alden assumed something like Joe's enchanted ring would set it off. He made his body relax, and he stood still while the scanner worked. Foxbolt was watching the test strip do absolutely nothing. The word chain can be quite a feather in your cap, she said. If you use it often enough for us to be sure you've mastered it and can put it into play on demand, we'll add it to your official transcript. It'll become an additional proficiency consideration for entry into certain courses. And for when you're trying to get jobs one day, of course. The scanner stopped. Foxbolt was quiet for a moment as she received the readout. "You're not on drugs," she announced. "Keep it that way." "Will do. You can head back to the gym now. By the way, how's it going with the rope? I wish it was a poncho sometimes. Otherwise, it's fine." She laughed. "Keep plugging away at it. You're just getting started, and you've got your whole life ahead of you to turn it into something amazing." Alden paused on his way out the door. "Thank you." There wasn't really anything else to say, so he spun the knob and headed out. That was unexpectedly nice to hear. "You've got your whole life ahead of you," was one of those throwaway things people said. But it felt a lot less throwaway these days than it used to. I'm not going to die in that awful place. I'm not going to watch Kibby die. My biggest problems, for the next few months at least, are wondering when Bo will get himself unstuck from cat space and dealing with Winston Feather thinking I'm cheating in gym class. Life was really sweet right now. Line of asterisks, loot. Alden had ducked into the bathroom, and he was just in time to spot a pair of combat boots disappearing from the narrow gap at the bottom of a stall door as the owner tucked his feet out of sight. "What are you doing here?" The door opened to reveal Loot sitting on top of the toilet lid. He was still wearing his homemade yarn tank top over his t-shirt. "What the fuck? Can you see through walls?" he asked. "I know all your footwear," said Alden. "I've been watching you check for shoe pissers interference for weeks now." Then he realized why his roommate was probably hiding out in the bathroom in a building where he definitely didn't belong. "Were you worried about the team? Have you been spying on us?" "No. You were. I'm going to tell Hoyu you're a spy, too. Lexi and I are the only truly honest men in the lodge." Luke dropped his feet and stood up. "I was just making sure my word-chin students were actually using what I taught them. I was going to be very angry if I spent hours tutoring those idiots and they didn't even bother to chain up before the course. They did. I think Reinhardt actually tried to do the energy chain twice, but it didn't work the second time. They become harder to call toward you as you stack more of them." Luke took a step closer to him. "Sue. Self-mastery was so good you got drug-tested." Alden held up the finger that had just been pricked. It was now sealed with a waterproof bandage. "They stole my blood and everything." Luke looked pleased. "I know something that small shouldn't make me feel like I've accomplished anything, but it does." "I can't stay and talk to you," said Alden. "I have to do my business and get back to the gym." "But yes. You're the best. Are you just hiding out in here until we start running again or?" "Once people get on the indoor part of the course, everyone seems pretty distracted," Luke replied. "I just watched a little from the sidelines. Couldn't see everything, but I saw enough." "I'll show you all our recordings later," Alden promised. Less than a minute later, he was out of the bathroom and on his way back into the gym. He mentally pulled up the North of North website again and navigated to the page where they sold memberships. Then he texted Luke. "Do you ever work out?" "No." "Are you insinuating something?" "Of course not. Just a seconds." He bought the annual spa package. It granted you access to the fun stuff at North of North, relaxation rooms, the pools, and one free spa treatment a week. "Here," he texted. "Oh, thank you, present." Luke didn't respond until Alden had nearly reached the team. Instructor Klein was with them. He seemed to be busy breaking down the offensive and defensive decisions everyone had made on the course. "You didn't have to get me anything," Luke wrote. "You didn't have to spend forever teaching me. It's just me being friendly to a friend. Don't sweat it." "I plan to sweat it. In the fancy saunas. I believe I've told you I am well trained in the art of spending other people's money." Line of asterisks. By the time the race was a third of the way through, it was obvious that the Finley Tiet Jupiter team was going to wipe the floor with Vandy Marcia. Even though Vandy provided a decent counter to Tiet's darts. The Sky Shaper turned the air turbulent over virtually every part of her team's course any time the opponent was on the attack, and since Tayet couldn't tell which way the wind was blowing between her sniper perch and the other team's members, she couldn't account for it with her throws. "This is where my shooting has an advantage," Reinhard whispered. "Sure it does," Lexi said. "It does. It's not like when I try to shoot a trike with his skill active. My arrows will adjust themselves back toward the target if it's only wind in the way." "Could you shoot through Vandy's level of air movement though? I thought you said it would be hard when we talked about it before?" Hoyu asked. "It depends on how much wind is blowing between me and the person I'm aiming at, and air is, unfortunately, invisible." "So you have exactly the same problem as Tayet," Lexi concluded. "Now you're just being an ass," Reinhard exclaimed. "This is why everyone likes your brother more. I'm reminding you not to take wild shots. You have a history. I'm the captain now, and I order you both to stop fighting," said Hoyu. "You're creating tension on board my tightly run ship." "Our tightly run ship," said Astrid. "We aren't on the course yet," Lexi pointed out. "Astrid and I are already co-captaining," Hoyu told him. "Monitoring your morale, ensuring good behavior. Anyone who says anything negative to another teammate before the end of class has to chew jerky so that they can't talk anymore," Astrid added. "I like that," Hoyu said. She nodded. Punishments should fit the crime. Alden was paying more attention to the happenings on the course than their conversation. Max was out, taken down by Jupiter on his way up the wall. He'd hit his head, and it looked like it was going to count as unconsciousness, rather than death, which was the worst possible outcome from the game perspective. "We'll have to deal with Max for most of our run, then," he said. There had been some question about whether or not his team was going to overuse him on the first run again, but since he was currently unable to cast, he'd probably be able to do a lot more damage when they faced him. Well, he'll be able to if they actually have him doing the right sorts of things. Prior to getting knocked out, he'd been casting zones in the same locations as last time. They were a selfish team. Nobody defended anyone else. They wanted zones that improved their individual ability to conquer specific obstacles rather than increasing the team's overall chance of winning. Typing notes up for when instructor Marion came back around to talk strategy, Alden allowed himself to be scathing in his analysis. "Are you worried about Max?" Everly asked him. "Strategically?" Alden shook his head. "Not really. But it's only because they're the worst, and he's decided to spite them by letting them go on being the worst. If he was actually trying to help them, he'd be a serious problem. They should use him to lay down the float zones on the wall so that they can swim up it, then they should send him back out to the track to ruin our life." "I did expect them to use him that way," said Hoyu. "They are not using the treadmill zone at all." Alden nodded. Max's trap zone, the one that made it so that the person inside it ran without ever moving forward, was one of the few talents that could be used out on the track against other players. It was completely harmless, so it wasn't off limits out there. And even if it only captured someone for a couple of minutes, that was a really long delay on the course. All he has to do is lay it down after everyone on the other team has gone inside where they can't see him. There's no way to know where it is until you step on it. And there's the reason they haven't been letting him use it." Hoyu pointed toward Marcia. She was heading toward Jupiter like a rocket. It was abundantly obvious that Marcia considered the attacker job to be hers. When her team had a strike available, she would only hang back if a member of the enemy team was assaulting their half of the course and she felt like dealing with them first. "So she's really only interested in fighting S ranks," Jerry said. "Until now, I was still wondering if she might be thinking of it as going for the most valuable members of the other team, and those all happened to be the S's. But it seems more like she's got rank tunnel vision." On the bleacher below Alden, Lucille was biting one of her fingernails. "We'll be fine," he said. "Just like the other teams have been." "Let's feed her to victory," said Jeffy. Jerry held her hand up for a high five. "I think we've got this." Line of asterisks. They were heading out to the track for the final run of the night, all of them in a great mood and hatching plans for how to deal with the other team's every man for himself style. when Maricel suddenly gasped. The bags of dirt she was floating ahead of her, looking a lot dirtier and worse for the wear after having been repackaged and heavily taped back into usable condition, hit the ground with a weighty thud. "You didn't just fatigue your skills, did you?" Reinhard said in a horrified voice. "We'll lose." "Wow," said Astrid. "Go ahead and tell everyone who you think the best teammate is. Don't hold back." "Maricel?" Everly asked in a concerned voice. Alden was worried, too. Maricel was staring straight ahead, her face slack. "Hey, are you all right?" She said. "You all go. I have to talk to someone." "What?" Reinhard said. "Now? Right this second?" I'll be right with you." She started tapping her fingers through the air, texting somebody. "All right," said Hoyu, when it looked like everyone was just going to hang around awkwardly waiting on her. "She'll meet us on the track." Alden kept looking over his shoulder all the way to the track. Maricel stood staring for a while at something on her interface, her fingers nervously twirling one of the protective cuffs they all wore on their wrists. She said something. Then a shocked look crossed her face, and she froze for a while before whirling around and taking off back toward the gym. "I think there's a problem," he said. They all exchanged looks. "Maybe it's bad news from home," Everly suggested. "I hope not." A short while later, Instructor Ivanova headed for their team. "All right," she said in a brisk voice. "I just got word from the gym. Maricel had a sudden personal matter to deal with. She's not going to be able to make this run. You can take a couple of minutes to adjust your plans, and then we'll start." Chapter 128. From the very beginning, there was something ugly about it. Alden's team was missing a carapace. They were worried, nervous, and not sure what they were supposed to be doing now that all of their plans had been upset. And the personalities of their opponents added an additional element of tension that hadn't been present in any of the previous matches. The members of Team Vandy Marcia, who had been grim from their earlier losses, suddenly felt like they had a chance. Maricel's absence put a couple of them in a much more optimistic mood. They were excited by the fact that they wouldn't be going up against one of the class's most powerful students after all, and they were too self-absorbed to hide it. "Jerkusses," thought Alden, surfacing in the water tank and gulping in a few breaths before he grabbed a third float and plunged downward again. Vandy had been upset about Maricel, of course. They were on their way to being friends if they weren't there already. But Marcia. Alden gritted his teeth and kicked furiously toward the bottom of the tank, shoving the float ahead of him. Even if Maricel hadn't gone missing, even if he and his team members weren't all a little anxious for her, he still thought they would have struggled in this race more than they'd originally expected. There's something brutal about these guys, and the fact that they have no clear plan of their own fucks up all of our attempts to make plans that counter them. Case in point, the game was around halfway through, and Alden was currently doing Jeffy's job. That hadn't even been on their radar as a backup scheme. Things had been weird like this the whole race, starting from the second the other team hit the gym. It was more like they were forcing their way down the course instead of running it, trying to keep up with Marcia, who was so hell-bent on getting first attack that she practically carried the class's one and only vocal brute to the finish line and tossed him over it. Alden's team hadn't been lagging too far behind despite everything. They decided to send Astrid and Jerry over the line first to give themselves some attack options, and Alden had just finished putting the two of them, along with Jeffy and Reinhard, up on top of the wall when the other team's bell rang to announce that Marcia had earned them the right to attack. "Okay," Hoyu had said. At that time, he and Lexi had taken a position on the floor at that end of the weights with the intention of forcing incoming enemies to confront them rather than running through toward the people on the wall. Let's be wary. The smart thing for them to do would be wait until they had two attacks available so that they could. Or not. Here she comes. Marcia had run straight at the two of them, thrown her weapon into the air high over their heads before she reached them and used her reverse recall to fly up toward it, gaining enough altitude that rather only managed to sever an aglet from one of her shoelaces as she passed. She and the polearm, in spear form, hit the floor on their side of the course hard enough that she had to be at least slightly injured. But you wouldn't have known it from the way she sprang up again and dashed for the wall, where Alden was standing at the base. Even if he had been fully rested and holding a large shield, he wouldn't have been foolish enough to think he could take an S-rank Meister's strike dead on. He didn't want to lose the use of his skill for the rest of the game, so he opted for death. Or he opted for what would have been his death if Marcia was a player who cared about winning more than her own personal agenda. Alden dropped preservation on his paracord, and flung a temper sphere at her as she approached. Because why not try everything? Then he dove under the tip of the spear and at her knees as she reached him. His first thought was, I can't believe I managed to grab her before she stabbed me. His second was, oh God. It's like I've grabbed a bear. Marcia didn't even stumble. She just plowed right through him and over him, which didn't count as an attack on her part since he was the one who'd thrown himself in front of the freight train and she had made no move at all to injure him. Alden rolled across the floor, gasping, and looked up to see Marcia scaling the wall with another toss of her spear. Reinhard shot her twice, going for injuries rather than kills because an injured Marcia was way better for them. She had one dead arm and one half-functional one when she leaped past him and into their tank. To attack Jeffy. In the water. She probably could have taken out Astrid and Jerry, who were also in the tank right then, with one swing. She could have taken out Reinhard or Alden as she passed. Instead, she took a ton of injuries, let a very confused Jeffy drag her down to the bottom of the tank, and then attacked him after she was on the verge of drowning. For what was basically a murder-suicide that managed not to violate any rules. Killing yourself was a no-go, but being reckless in your pursuit of a target wasn't. Jeffy was upset in the immediate aftermath, but it really wasn't his fault. None of them had given him advice on what to do if an enemy came into the tank with him, and the last thing he heard Reinhard shout through combs was I'll make sure not to kill her. So he'd wavered, not sure what the right thing was. That skill of Marcia's that released an invisible strike had speared him in the chest. That was insane, Astrid said after it was over. If she had to take out an S, why didn't she go for Lucille first? Lucille was on the ground at the frozen fire obstacle, guarding Everly. She was a much easier target than Jeffy. Reinhard was angry with himself. I should have shot her lethally. I could have. We just agreed to go for injuries, and I thought arrows to the shoulders would be plenty. It's fine, said Hoyu. Shake it off, everybody. Especially you, Jeffy. That was basically a wasted attack for them since Marcia's going back to start, too. Look how annoyed Vandy is. Vandy did look very displeased. She was sitting up on her team's monkey bar obstacle, brow furrowed and talking fast. Don't worry so much, Marcia responded on her way out of the gym. Her voice was loud enough to carry. Their team only has one S rank with Maricel gone. At the time, Alden wondered, rather naively, if she'd misspoken. But no. The next several minutes had shed light on the matter. Marcia, who seemed to have an interest in taking down other S's that bordered on obsession, didn't want to bother with Lucille. On her next attack, she took on Jeffy again, before he could make it back to the water. That time he was ready, sort of, and managed to grab hold of her and chant something as he died. What the hell was that? She'd asked when the spell did absolutely nothing obvious. What spell impression did you take? That's not going to work on her, Reinhard had said with a groan. With her skill. Why didn't he just punch her? He was struggling a bit with the fact that he couldn't successfully attack over there himself. High winds were such a good counter to arrows that it wasn't worth wasting a shot, and he would be confining himself to defensive shooting. Their next best attacker would have been Maricel. In her absence, they were going with an unusual combination. When they'd earned their first two attacks, Lexi crossed over to the enemy course with Everly. His job was to use his one attack to protect her from whoever tried to interfere with her while she cast her slick ice patch over the ramp that led up to the area where the ton and half-ton weights had to be dropped. It was Everly's most powerful spell, and the ice it created was a bit more arcane than the sort humans regularly pulled out of a freezer. She'd used it a few times versus Instructor Klein, and the stuff was a menace. There was no running across it, only sliding, and it resisted melting and destruction. The other team would have to cajole Marcia into using her weapon to break it up if they wanted to get weights up the ramp again. The hastily developed plan went well enough. Everly got the ice down and got away. Lexi got killed but managed to wrap her around Meddy's arm and fling him skyward first. Everything was going well enough if Alden compared their team's progress to the others. The race was just chaotic, difficult, and increasingly bitter. As he headed down into the depths of the tank with yet another float, the world went quiet except for the sound of Astrid and Hoyu encouraging everyone through combs. They were doing their best to counter the negativity and confusion with good attitudes and constant call-outs about what was going on. Which couldn't be that easy to keep track of since Vandy had, at long last, gotten fed up with Marcia. After that last risky assault on Jeff, he had carried the polearm-wielding Meister right past juicier targets once again. Vandy had started trying to direct the team without any further regard for her most zealous teammates' attacks. Instead of letting Marcia run it a third time, she had taken her own shot and blown Reinhard right off the top of the wall with a powerful burst of air. He'd survived the long fall with such a heavy movement restriction that Hoyu had had to come carry him to the finish line. Vandy, deciding not to let Marcia have her way by working around her, seemed to have blown any last remaining crumb of team cohesion apart. It was a free-for-all over there, with some of the group thrusting toward the finish line with almost zero help and others waiting for the sound of the bell to claim the next attack. "They're losing," Hoyu called. "I know it's stressful right now, but just remember that the way they're playing is going to make them lose even if it is making our own strategies kind of useless." He'd pushed Reinhard over the line a while ago, and now he was heading to pick up Everly and move her through the course. With Vandy having proven herself willing to attack, they had to take her into consideration as well now. The higher, more precarious positions like the rope climb, the bars, and the top of the wall could become death traps. Hoyu had a spell impression that made him less likely to be knocked off his feet by blows. He seemed a little sheepish about it because it was a much weaker version of talents his parents had. But it was strong enough to help him resist Vandy's wind, so he'd be making sure Everly didn't get taken down on her way to the finish. "Lucille, are you good?" Astrid called. "You're sure you're fine to move the weights one more time for Jeffy to come through when he's done running track?" "Yes," she said softly. Under the water, his feet hooked under one trap to keep himself submerged while his fingers flicked open the catch of another, Alden winced. Even that single word reply sounded downtrodden. Lucille had launched herself into Marcia's path to protect Jeffy from that last assault. She'd made it there in time with an explosively powerful leap, but then her tackle and the toss that sent Marcia back toward her own course had been rather gentle. Especially for an S-rank grabbing and throwing another S-rank. Gentle enough that Marcia had managed to complete her swing and kill Jeffy for the second time. Gentle enough that Winston Feather had seen it and suddenly decided he could get in on the offensive action, too. His team's object shaper was over there on their course quietly turning all of the miscellaneous objects he'd brought into very sharp miscellaneous objects. He'd done the same on their last run. He seemed to want to attack people with them, but he never got around to actually doing it, so maybe it was just his way of staying out of his more aggressive teammates' paths. When their bell rang for the fourth time, Winston had snatched up a wind chime that had been turned into something more like a razor-sharp sickle. He had ordered up a speed zone from Max, run at Lucille, dove dramatically across the floor, and sliced her calf. Now she was moving the weights with a bum leg. She sounded like she was near tears, and Winston was watching her like a hawk, clearly hoping he'd get another shot. "Vandy's sending Max back out to the track again," Astrid reported. "He's jogging that way." "This is so stupid," Lexi spat. "It's like trying to figure out what a bunch of over-energized toddlers are going to do with their superpowers next." Max was doing what he'd sworn he would do and following instructions. Everyone's instructions. And because his team had nothing like organization since Vandy's break with Marcia, people were countermanding each other all the time. Vandy would send Max out to the track to lay down a trap. Obviously she thought that her team should have been using him that way from the start. Then Marcia would catch on and order him back because she didn't want him to take one of her attack slots. or Winston would call him back to lay down another speed zone in front of him, ostensibly so that he could attack faster or run back and forth through the fire. Alden was sure it was really so that he could run as fast as Finley while he put on a cool expression for the camera. As a result, Max was spending half his time running back and forth uselessly and the other half casting spells that benefited one or two people for very specific tasks. Someone had had the bright idea of telling him to lay down a bunch of the float zones under the monkey bars, so that nobody would die if they fell off. So that spell impression was now completely gone if Alden's count was right, and there was no benefit unless somebody on their team spontaneously lost grip strength on their way across that one obstacle. Now Hoyu was asking Jeffy if he wanted to use his land moves on Max, since they were both about to pass by each other outside and Max was unlikely to escape from an S-rank who gave chase. As long as it doesn't take him too long, Alden thought. Even though he was much slower than the Aqua Brute, he was still working steadily here to keep the obstacle cleared so that they could send Everly through without waiting for Jeffy to trap all the floats. I was not supposed to have to swim this much. There was no permutation of the plan that called for me being the team swimmer. He gasped in some more air and went back to it. Everyone was doing their best around all the madness. He was proud of his teammates for not getting too flustered with the state of things. He kept going through it all in his head. It was more important to keep a mental image of their positions in mind when he was down here where he had no way to see them. I'm in here doing my job and staying safe from attack unless Marcia decides she'd like to spearfish for a B rank. Astrid, Jerry, and Reinhard are over the finish line. Lucille is still pushing through the weights for us. She's the best for it even if she's limping. Jeffy'll be back in the gym in a minute. Hoyu and Everly will make it to me right ahead of him, and I'll pull them all up. Hoyu had helped himself to Reinhard's bow and used it to shoot arrows into this side of the wall above the tank so that Alden could climb back up to the top when it was time. Reinhard had been officially unconscious and therefore unable to complain aloud without getting in trouble, but they'd gotten some indecipherable mental texts from him that probably meant something like, "How dare you play with my bow, you swine." He didn't mind people touching the arrows, but he was a little precious about the bow. The current plan, which was the dozenth they'd had in as many minutes, was for the final 6 team members to head over the finish line in 2 groups. First would be Everly and Lexi. Then Hoyu, Alden, Lucille, and Jeffy wouldn't cross until they were all together. The 4 of them should be able to tackle every obstacle on the course, even if one of them was knocked out by an assault and had to be carried. They weren't even going to bother trying another attack after Everly and Lexi were over the line. They were just going to run for it and get this mess over with. "I got Max," Jeffy said excitedly. "I grabbed him and did the spell. Do you think he minded?" "I think Max has given up on minding things for the day, Jeffy," said Astrid. "Now hurry back here. Alden is doing your job at 10% speed." Not long after that, Alden got word that it was showtime for him and he pulled himself out of the tank. He heard an all too familiar soft sploosh sound behind him as he climbed the few wobbly arrows up to the top. One of the floats had come free of its trap and would have to be put back. Breathing hard, he made it to the top of the wall. Lying flat on his belly so that any surprise attacks from Vandy would be less likely to knock him off, hair dripping in his eyes, he looked over the edge to see Hoyu, Lexi, Everly and Jeffy below him. "Hi there," he said. "Your skill's okay, isn't it?" Hoyu asked. "Should we go up all together to save you from having to use it for longer?" All together was, debatably, riskier this late in the game, with attacks more likely to come in as the other team gained more finishers of their own. Alden getting knocked off the wall while he was lifting the 4 of them could result in kills and crippling injuries for half the team at once. "I'm fine. Let's do it 2 at a time to be on the safe side." "Lucille," Astrid called from where she watched at the end of the course. "Be sure to shout if you see Vandy making shaping gestures." Now that everyone was through the weights for what they hoped would be the last time, the injured brute was bringing up the rear and serving as their watcher. She was up near the ceiling, clinging to the platform at the end of the bars, her strength ensuring a good grip that would keep Vandy from trying an assault on her. As soon as Lexi and Everly were over the finish line, she'd slide down the steep diagonal beam to join the final four in this section of the course. Alden would pull her up. "And then we can wrap this up." He tied a large loop into the end of a length of cord and lowered it, preserving just before he reached the floor almost 50 feet below him. He pulled Everly and Jeffy up. She gave him a tired smile. "I'm ready for this one to be over with," she said. Then she splashed down into the tank with the aqua brute. Alden pulled Lexi and Hoyu up, feeling anxious the whole way. But they made it to the top, too. Lexi dove into the water. While Jeffy dragged him and Everly toward the bottom, Hoyu crouched beside Alden, recast his spell impression, and grabbed the back of Alden's gym suit in a firm grip. "I call this my anti-wind move," he said quietly, eyes shifting from Vandy to Lucille and back. "I appreciate it. Death by falling is no fun. Sorry you had to swim the whole race." "It's fine," said Alden. "Jeffy got to do his thing. I'm looking forward to seeing the results of it." In truth, he was getting pretty tired. Speed swimming was exhausting anyway, and doing it with floats trying to drag you back to the surface the whole time was a lot harder. Now Lucille was coming down the beam, using the slide grip slide method they'd all settled on. "She's cry eyes." Hoyu sent the mental text to Alden privately. No talking. It was true. Lucille had been getting more vocal toward the end of the race against Fibri Shrike earlier, but now she'd almost totally shut down. No matter how many encouragements Astrid sent her way, she seemed to be hanging on to herself by a thread. "She's angry with herself," Alden replied. "The team wouldn't be this far along without Lucille. Even if all she did was the weights, it was a huge benefit. The damn things took so much time and combinations of at least two people for the rest of them to move." But Lucille had missed chances to take out enemies that another person with her abilities wouldn't have missed, and she was obviously very aware of it. "I was afraid Reinhard was going to say something to her about it," Alden admitted. "He looked so pissed after she softballed Marcia. But he let it go." "Good team," said Hoyu. Max ran back into the gym with a totally blank expression on his face. Either he'd actually succeeded in putting a trap out there for the first time since the obstacle courses had started, or he'd been race-summoned by some team member who wanted to use him stupidly. Alden watched him hit his knees and head through the tube. When he emerged, he laid down what had to be one of his last speed zones inside the fire obstacle to get through with the minimum possible movement restriction. "Do you think Max trapped the track?" Hoyu asked, narrowing his eyes. "They've got an attack. So he could have." The enemy bell rang again. "It's annoying that they have two more players than us. Then again, given their complete inability to get along, maybe more wasn't merrier in this case." Lucille hit the end of the beam and limped toward them. Though it's not really limping by a normal human measure. More like strength-infused one-legged bounds, that put her at the base of the wall in moments. Alden had the court preserved and waiting for her. "They've got at least one attack for sure now," Hoyu said. "They need to take it. Vandy could try to knock Lexi off the tightrope, or Marcia looks like she." "Winston," said Alden, spotting the speedster as he blitzed across the boundary between the two courses. Once he'd done that, he was the official attacker for his team for one turn. "Lucille, grab on. Let me get you in the air." She hesitated. Alden thought it was because she wanted to try it. To fight back. All she had to do was hit Winston in the leg, and he was done for. The game was over. Everyone knew it. But she hesitated, and you couldn't do that versus people who'd been shaped by the system to be fast. Alden thought Winston Feather was a nasty, shallow piece of work, but he did move like a speedster. Like his stats are telling reality itself, he has the right to move through it quicker than the rest of us. It had been a half-developed concept in Alden's mind until right this second, a slightly different perception of foundation points he'd been arriving at after his last talk with the system and after watching his classmates do so many amazing things over the past weeks. It's easy to forget when the power looks physical instead of mystical, but there it is, he thought grimly as the wind chime sickle Winston had stolen earlier flashed across Lucille's throat. Winston's using every bit of his magic, and Lucille's scared to use all of hers. She leaned against the wall below him and Hoyu, a devastated expression on her face. Winston's attack hadn't pushed her back even a step, but his aim had been true. Alden was sure she had just gotten a death notice. Winston paused and looked up toward the drone with a winning smile on his face, and Alden's hands made a judgment call before his brain had caught up with them. He snatched the bag full of unused temper spheres off of himself and shook his whole supply of them out on top of Winston's head. "Put that on your website," he muttered, as Winston yelped and ducked, zipping back to the safety of his team's side so fast that it was clear he imagined himself to be under a much more serious assault than he actually was. "If you hadn't done that, I was about to jump on him," said Hoyu. "From 50 feet up? I almost definitely wouldn't die. But he might. If I hit him. Bit embarrassing if he dodged, though." "Shake it off, Lucille," Astrid called. "No big deal. You're the fastest person we have. If you hurry, Everly's freeze might still be in effect on the firebox when you come back through." "That's right," said Jerry. "Get back out there. We're almost done." Sorry," Lucille said, wiping her eyes on the back of her sleeve. "I'll hurry." Alden was relieved she was still moving. He'd been afraid for a second that she was going to give up. "Oh man," he said as he watched her go. "The track." Hoyu looked at him. Then he groaned. "Max." Alden nodded. "It could be trapped. Assuming they gave him time to do it before they summoned him back. It probably is, since Marcia isn't running over here to stab something. He must have used that other attack they earned for it. Lucille can probably bust through. It won't hold an S rank for long. It might delay her for just a minute though," Alden said. "We don't really need a delay, and he was worried about how she'd react to enduring yet another mishap. Even such a small one. Repeat failures felt really bad. They felt even worse when you knew 40 other people were watching you and judging you. "Permission to depart, co-captain?" he said. Hoyu's lips twitched a little. "Yes. If you want to." "Yes." Astrid agreed. Alden nodded. "I'll run with her and make sure the trap isn't a problem. If you stay here with Jeffy, well, it's better. Two of you to watch each other's backs. And Lucille and I will do the same. Nobody alone. More flexibility. Here." He slapped his cord down on top of the wall. He had a couple more pieces long enough to get himself and Lucille up here if Hoyu couldn't hold the post until they got back. 5 minutes left, said Hoyu. Plenty of time. On his way out of the gym, Alden saw Winston pointing at Max and then at the ground in front of himself demandingly. Line of asterisks. Since Alden hadn't died, he didn't have to run the track 3 times before heading back to the gym. He was just going to hang out and make sure Lucille didn't have any trouble. But when he got out there, he saw she was already having trouble. She was really crying as she cleared hurdles one after the other. "It's fine, Lucille," he said, standing at the edge of the track. The sun was getting low in the sky. "I slept through half of our first run. Remember? You could die 3 more times and you'd still accomplish more than I did that race. I'm ruining it for you all." She overshot a hurdle by at least a yard and landed hard on the other side. I wanted to fight B back, but I'm not good at guessing how hard I can hit when people come at me fast. Understandable. Nobody's mad. Nothing's ruined. We're still going to win because they're a shit team. I'm supposed to be our most powerful fighter. Especially with Maricel gone. And Vandy countering the arrows. I'm letting you all down. Lexi had to defend Everly. Hoyu, Lexi totally wanted to hit someone with Ruther, said Alden. And he got Medi. And Medi's too stubborn to leave their course, so he's just hobbling around in there. Hoping for I don't know what. It's all good. I swear. Lucille was rounding the track's second curve when she suddenly stopped going forward. Her feet were still moving, but each one of her bounding strides went absolutely nowhere. Yep, there it is, thought Alden. She stopped and stared down at her boots. Alden ran over to join her. Her cheeks were wet with tears. She was one of those people who got really red and puffy when they teared up. He could sympathize. I'm trapped, she said in a thick voice. You are. Thanks for finding that for us. He smiled. Want me to throw you a rope, or do you want to bust out of it by overwhelming it with super strength? I bet you could. One really forceful jump. Why are you so nice to me? She was scrubbing at her eyes again. You should be mad. People make mistakes while they're trying to figure out their powers. Would you be mad if I made one? She was still looking at her boots. They are just going to attack me again, she said. As soon as I get back in the gym, I'll just mess up again. They should really focus on their own course instead of risking more attacks, said Alden. So maybe, she shook her head furiously. I heard Marcia say it to one of them on my way out. That she'd just let Winston keep. That maybe it would make me learn a lesson if an A took me down over and over. She was mad I wouldn't fight her the way she wanted in superlatives last week. Marcia's some kind of battle freak. They need to turn the gym's realism settings all the way up and see if that sobers her ass. I think it's fine that you want to figure out how to take people down without killing them. I think it's good for you to practice that in whatever way works best for you. Maybe it's different than how I would do it. I don't really know. I'm not in your shoes. But this is class. Class is for practice. I'm at this school because it's an educational facility, and honestly I find it tedious how almost everyone else seems to think it's a magical dick measuring facility instead. She finally met his eyes. She looked a little alarmed. Alden shrugged. I hope Winston does attack you again. Because I actually want to educate myself. I'm curious to see how a rabbit should fight a speed brute. So if he does, let me deal with it. What? You think I can't? No. I'm sure you can. Her eyes were wide. It's not the end of the world if I can't. I'll try it. If I get hurt, you'll carry me over the finish line with your brute strength. If you get hurt, I'll tie you up in a bunch of rope and carry you over the finish line with my magic. Right? She hesitated. Right? By the way, he added, I saw someone ripped in half by a strength brute once. It was gruesome. It probably saved my life. I really doubt Marcia has more insight into the matter than you or I do, so definitely don't listen to her opinion on how you want to handle your rank and class. He pointed at her. Now break out of that puny trap and run. Fast. Despite everything I just said about dick measuring, I don't want to lose to such an awful team. Catch me before I get back to the gym. He turned to go. About 10 seconds passed before he heard a grunt followed the sound of boots hitting the pavement hard, as if the owner had landed from a particularly forceful jump. Line of asterisks, you're sure you don't want us to come back that way for you? Hoyu asked. Or just me? We should really leave Jeffy in the water. We're fine, said Alden, crawling through the pipe behind Lucille. A blade of torn grass fell off the bottom of her shoes. Let's stick with the 2-and-2 plan for now. Is that good with you, Lucille? We're fine, she said. We've got this. Pause for a second, Alden told her. Let me prep something before we exit the pipe, while the other team can't see us. What? I brought something special for handling our faster classmates. I didn't expect I'd actually get to use it. Nobody ever asked the rabbit to go on the attack after all. There were much more qualified people. Nice of Winston to make himself such a nuisance, he thought, pulling more of the blindingly yellow paracord free from his supply of it. Line of asterisks, line of asterisks. Winston Heel Feather concentrated on every part of his body. The way the balls of his feet rested on the ground, the tension in his spine, the twist of the sickle in his right hand, then his left, then his right. Tossing it with avowed grace was what he was going for, but you couldn't always tell how it looked until you'd seen the footage. He did a smile. One of the fans called it his looks could kill smile. It was a little one, but confident. Already beaten S twice, the caption would say. Do you guys think I'm brave enough to try it a third time? Presence was everything. Well, no. Power was better. But he had an A to work with, so he would work with it. There were some A's who were more famous than S's. Hotter, funnier, cooler. He would be one of them. They are coming out of the pipe. When to take her? What would look best? Not when she was on her knees escaping from the pipe. Even though Winston wasn't allowed to show the actual moment he killed her because of the rules about sharing images of other students, sometimes the video watchers really analyzed his movements. Those overzealous fans might notice the angle he approached his victim from and realize he'd been going for someone on the ground. Bad luck. He wished he could have one more attack. Just one more. 3 times for the only S in the class besides Con that Marcia didn't want to fight herself. And then one for Alden Thorne. That guy needed to be taken down several notches. He was getting so much attention for having a cute face and a fucked up story. For being the stupidest class and dropping a plate full of vegetables and singing about freaky alien birds that ate each other. Winston's fans wanted to know more about him. Maybe I should go for him after all. No. Focus on what mattered. Alden could go around polishing alien silverware and dropping carrots on other freckled orphans. Eventually, it would stop being novel and people would forget him. It would go that way. It was just logic. What mattered was Winston building himself and his image. His legend. He watched Lucille emerge from the pipe. The rest of her team was at the other end of the course. She was scared to hit people too hard, so she was a sitting duck. Through the fire, he decided. The ice was getting thin. The melting water, a few flames, it was going to look great. Hey! Have you got another speed boost for me? Max was lurking around Winston. Winston didn't know why. Someone who ran at purely human speed should be booking it down the course so he wouldn't hold the rest of them up at this point. But since he was here. You're going to attack Lucille again? The B rank asked. She's got Alden with her. Better watch out. Winston narrowed his eyes. Are you being funny or something? Max glanced toward the other team. Alden was coming out of the pipe, a length of that fluorescent yellow rope in his hand. Sure, said Max. I happen to have just one more speed zone. Tell me where you want it, and down it will go. Line of asterisks. Parachute cord was a type of carmantle rope. Smaller inner strands were held together and protected from breakage by the woven exterior sheath. The outer sheaths came in lots of different colors, including shades so bright they almost hurt your eyes. The inner strands in most of Alden's paracord collection were white. The floor of the gymnasium was also white. The possibilities were obvious. But just in case, he had taken it a step further. Some types of paracord, mostly meant for survivalists, had neat things inside them apart from the plain white core. Wires, fire starter strands, even fishing line. And it took no time at all to get at the stuff. You just grabbed the end of whichever interior strand you wanted and pulled. It came right out, inch by inch, foot by foot. Before they'd left the pipe, Alden had pulled some of his fishing line out. When he straightened it all out and preserved it, he had a very obvious paracord line several feet in length with an even longer, but much less obvious, strand of fishing line sticking out from the end. Winston came for them as soon as they were on their feet, so quickly that Alden barely had time to admire his new tool. The speedster blasted through the melting fire obstacle, his feet shattering the very thin layer of ice left on the floor. He was moving at freeway speeds. At that speed, most people couldn't see strands of transparent fishing line. It turned out Winston Feather couldn't either. Alden thrust the cord out, turned his wrist just in time to get it positioned parallel to the floor between the fire obstacle and Lucille, and then he felt the impact on his authority as Winston cloth S-lined himself and fell backwards. The other teen hit the floor hard, grabbing at his neck, a shocked expression on his face. Just that fast, it was over. Alden let his skill drop. Winston running into had almost fatigued it the rest of the way anyway. Alden had pushed farther than he'd meant to. Other avowed directly striking the preserved object seemed to hit harder than equivalent non-avowed forces. That kind of thing wasn't an unknown phenomenon. He just hadn't had a lot of personal experience with it. Magic clashing with magic. Authority versus authority. Winston had winded himself. He was still staring up at the ceiling in astonishment. All right, said Alden, stepping around him and hurrying toward the next obstacle before it could turn into an inferno. So that's done. Lucille, My skill's gone. I'll have to rely on you and Hoyu to get me past the weights and over the wall. Did you guys just take out Winston? Astrid called. What was that? I'm pretty sure Alden just decapitated him, said Hoyu. Let's win now, said Alden. I want to go eat Filipino food. Line of asterisks, line of asterisks. The race ended with Lucille crossing the tightrope over the finish line. The bell rang, and an instant later, they were all smiling, half the drama of the past 20 minutes forgotten in an instant. Astrid started doling out hugs to everyone. Beautiful land moves. She shouted in Jeffy's ear, pointing toward the other team's course. Look what you accomplished. In their water tank, Max was floating peacefully on his back. And Marcia was upside down, her legs kicking wildly in the air as she tried to dive. And failed. Her glaive was at the bottom of the tank. She had thrown it down there, no doubt planning to pull herself toward it that way, but it seemed like she'd overused the ability. Maricel said she was prone to overworking herself and running out of gas, Alden said. Guess it happened. Who would have thought a life jacket spell could be used to defeat people? Hoyu sounded amused as he watched Marcia struggle. It must be pretty strong. She's not getting anywhere. If you cast it 8 times you can make a tract, a really heavy truck float, Jeffy announced. I practiced it before I left home. It's good, said Alden. You beat Winston, Lexi said. Yeah. I kind of wanted to save that trick to try on Klein. But this was a worthy cause. Marcia kicked her feet so hard one of her shoes flew off, but she kept right on bobbing in the water like a cork. Toad continued,